Hi guys, sorry we're a little late this afternoon. It's been a busy time at the library. If you haven't come in to get your summer reading program stuff, please do. It's a lot of fun. Also, we had the Grafton Museum here today, every Wednesday, 1:30. They were fantastic. All right, the book I have for you today, The Animal Rescue Agency, Case File, Little Claus. Okay, here's what the inside cover says. When a little polar bear cub winds up trapped on an ice floe heading out to sea, his mother knows there's only one place to turn, the Animal Rescue Agency. Dashing Esquire Fox used to organize the world's most elaborate chicken raids until the day she encountered Mr. Pepper. Meeting the blustery old rooster changed her heart, convincing her to turn from a life of crime and instead form the Animal Rescue Agency, which masterminds rescue operations across the globe. Esquire and her unlikely chicken business manager coordinate with their far-flung clients to get themselves to the Arctic. In that frozen land, they learn what happened to the polar bear cub was no accident, and that saving him will pit them against the scariest predator in the world, a human. All right. Chapter 1, Prologue, which is actually not Chapter 1, it's the prologue. Little Claus yawned and opened his eyes for the first time in months. What woke him up? A dripping sound. Snow melting into the den. Springtime! He leaped into the air, landing right on his mother's face. She grunted, batted him to one side, and placed her large white paws over her eyes. It's not time yet. Go back to sleep. Little Claus bit into her ear and tugged. I know what spring sounds like. Now go outside. No, his mother Big Claus grumbled. We're going to sleep for a long time more. You can if you want. I'm going outside. This was his second spring awakening, and he knew how it worked. He leaped up and clawed at the snow. Bits of sleet fell into the den. Little Claus, Big Claus warned, but it was too late. A circle of sunlight had appeared in the roof, and chill air streamed in. Little Claus took a deep sniff. He smelled seawater, tender young bird, salty Arctic fish. He bounded out of the den. Big Claus groaned. Am I the only mother who lets her cub get away with this sort of thing, she thought. Come on, Little Claus called from outside. Big Claus knew that her cub could be in danger from male polar bears. She'd better get out there and protect him. Grumbling, she lifted herself up to sitting and stretched her long, unused limbs. Whether she was ready for it or not, spring was here. It's amazing, Mom, Little Claus called. Big Claus poked her head out of the den, shaking sleep from her eyes. She saw a long expanse of unbroken ice, deeper and smoother and cleaner than when they'd bedded down at the beginning of winter. But where was her cub? She called for Little Claus and sniffed the air worriedly. Something whizzed toward her. She jerked, turning just in time to get struck full in the snout by a snowball. Happy spring, Mom, Little Claus called, popping up from behind a snowdrift. Your turn. Try and get me. Do not throw a snowball at your mother ever again, she growled. A second snowball hit her, this one glancing off the top of her head and spraying into crystals. Little Claus stared at her, mouth wide open in glee, waiting for her to react. Snarling, Big Claus stood on her two back paws. Little Claus shrank in fear. Maybe he had gone too far. Big Claus turned away for a moment, as if to get her anger under control, then slowly faced her son again. Only now she had a big snowball in her paws. It was as big as Little Claus himself. His eyes widened. Mom, no, you wouldn't. Oh, yes, I would. And she did. Soon he was covered nose to tail in powdery snow. Ha! He said, pouncing through the snow piles. Good one. I'll get you back for that. Laughing, his mother trailed him through the drifts, dodging his snowballs as best as she could, and getting off a few of her own. Soon their stomachs would be rumbling, but for now there was no harm in having fun. She charged Little Claus, growling, Giggling, he bounded away, somersaulting down a snowy slope. He became a ball of white fur, gaining more and more speed as he went. Down at the bottom was a stretch of ice, and then the frigid sea. The water looked gray and cold, but it would be no real danger if Little Claus fell in. He had thick fur to keep the chill away, though he hadn't really learned to swim. He could paddle a few feet back to the shore with no problem. It was something else that made Big Claw's heart seize. Standing at the horizon was a dark figure, totally still, and Little Claus was rocketing towards it. Little Claus belly flopped onto the ice at the bottom of the hill, giggling. "Get down here, Mom, that was so great." She stood up on her back legs and stared at the figure. It looked like a man. She'd seen them on the decks of ships, but humans were never on foot this far north. This was a land of animals only. Big Claus wanted to cry out to her cub, but didn't want to attract the stranger's attention. She started down the slope. Little Claus didn't seem to notice the human. He was busy plowing through the fluffy snow, making tunnels and sprays of powdery white. The figure held still, making no move to approach. It was definitely a human, a tall one. Big Claus could see now that she was closer. And here was the strange thing. He was wearing a hat made of white fur. She'd never seen such a thing. It was the color of polar bear fur. Still unaware, Little Claus was tumbling and playing. He sprinted towards the water, sending a flock of Arctic birds squawking into the air. When they landed, he took off after them again. He was moving farther and farther away from Big Claus. She bounded down the slope towards her son. The snow gave under her, and she started plowing down it. It was all she could do to stay right side up as she went. As she reached the bottom, the Arctic birds took off over the open water. Little Claus turned and watched her. "Did you see that? I almost caught one, Mom." "Come back," Big Claus ordered, sprinting across the ice. She noticed something strange separating her from Little Claus, a black line, not a crack, but something laid on top of the ice. It led to a device the man in the white fur hat had down by his feet. "Are you worried the ice will break?" Little Claus called. He hopped into the air and back down on the frozen ground, sending seawater sloshing over the sides. "Because I checked it just like you taught me to. It'll hold me." Big Claus tossed her head in the direction of the man in the white fur hat. "We're not alone." "Really?" Little Claus said, tottering on his back legs as he peered around. "I don't see anyone." "It's because you're too small," Big Claus said as she continued towards her son. "But you'll just have to trust—" The man in the white fur hat leaned over his device, and then there was a distant click. The dark line that had been laid on top of the ice roared and burst into light. The air boomed, snow and ice spraying up all around the Big Claus. She shielded her eyes and managed to stay upright under the blast. When she uncovered her face, she saw that the explosion had kicked so much frost into the air that she couldn't see more than a few feet in front of her. She roared and lunged to her cub, despite the ice spray that still clogged the air and stung her nose and bit her lungs. When enough of the air had cleared, she could finally see what had happened to Little Claus. She pulled up short and groaned. He'd been knocked to the ground by the blast. He struggled to get to his paws, his eyes wide with fear. "Mom!" The man's explosion had caused a giant crevasse to appear between the two of them. It was widening in front of her eyes. Little Claus was headed out to sea. He was in the middle of his ice floe, limbs splayed out and claws digging in as he desperately tried to keep his balance in the rough waves. "Help me!" he shrieked. "I'm coming," she said. Her little one hadn't practiced swimming yet. Teaching him how was one of the first activities she'd planned for this spring. She'd have to swim to him, not the other way around. He dug his claws into the ice, his body sweeping from side to side as the waves rocked the floe. Big Claws leaped into the water, sending up more giant waves. She snorted as frigid seawater entered her nose and stung her eyes. She swam towards Little Claus, her gaze trained on her cub. She was a powerful swimmer and cut a smooth course through the waves. But the Arctic currents were strong. Every time she came to the crest of a wave and got a view of the floe, it and Little Claus was further away. Her son was disappearing. As the sea pulled further out, his voice got weaker. "Help me, Mom," he called. Big Claws kept up her swimming speed, despite the burning feeling deep in her muscles. She'd sooner die than let her son disappear. But as the flow sped away in the open sea, she had to make a decision. She could chase after it and likely drown, or return to solid land and try to find another way. "I'll rescue you, I promise," she called after her son. "Just hold tight, my love." Heart heaving, she turned around and paddled toward shore. Exhausted, she dragged herself back onto the solid ice. What could she possibly do to rescue Little Claws? As she panted, coughing out seawater and sucking in air, she recovered enough to see that the man in the white hat was still on the horizon. He was staring out to sea, precisely where her cub was trapped on his floe. He'd done this to them? But why? She was tempted to sprint towards the man, to punish him for what he'd done, but she was tired, and her first priority was Little Claws. He hadn't had a bite to eat since he came out of hibernation, and here he was, trapped at sea. If he didn't get rescued within a few days, he'd starve. And that was only part of the danger. If he fell into the water, he'd drown. If he drifted far enough south and the ice melted, he'd drown. Big Claws had no way of getting out to sea. She knew she couldn't rescue her son on her own. She needed help. And when an animal truly needed help, there was only one place to turn: the Animal Rescue Agency. So here's the picture. And it says, artist rendering of incident off the coast of Tern polar bear walrus calves. Please relay to Esquire Fox of the Animal Rescue Agency, ASAP urgent. So my guess is that's what the next chapter is going to be. They're going to receive the message. Not sure how they're going to save that polar bear, but if you want to find out, you can come and get this book. Talk to you next Wednesday, guys. Bye.